You're good.
All right, there we go. Do I need to hit continue on this? I have a little, there we go. Okay, something popped up for me. All right, hello everyone. My name is Amy Crumpton, and I'm really excited to be here tonight with you. And I want to thank my cohort, Sandy Tarpinian, for the two previous sessions on intentional gardening that she did on wildlife and on making room for pollinators in your yard. She gave, I think, a very thorough introduction as to why this really matters for us to think about our yards as something more than just, you know, something superficial, that it actually is a piece of our ecosystem that we have the privilege of being able to steward. And she provided a lot of lovely photos of many native plants that I think should be convincing that if you go this route, that you are not sacrificing beauty for, you know, weedy stuff. There are some just beautiful plants to have, and those plants have a amplifying effect on our wildlife and our insect populations, which is what we need to be bolstering, because we are, as many of you know, in a climate crisis, and our wildlife is suffering, and we have ways that we can help. So here we go, landscaping like it matters. This is the Cliff version of this. If any of you know me, I can go on for hours on this subject, but this is, I'm trying to make it as succinct as possible. So there will probably be things that are kind of left out. I'll get to through the first section, and I'll stop for a minute, and we can take some questions if any of you have questions. Okay, so as Sandy had shown us in her previous webinars, there are possibilities in our yards. This is a really good example of a before and after. Somebody who is part of the National Wildlife Federation's, you know, Change Your Yard, Promote It for Wildlife. And you can see the before picture is sort of the typical traditional landscape with our little plants very neatly spaced from each other. A lot of plants that are ornamentals that are not native plants, but are from other areas of the world, that are typically not problematic because nothing eats on them, basically. This person decided to, you know, really go whole hog and change their front yard, get rid of a lot of their lawn, and put in a lovely array of native plants to change the view. And I think it's a beautiful example. So our problem, as you all know, and we all, I know, commiserate about this, is that the way that our conventional land use practices operate in our urban areas and suburban areas is really disruptive. It takes out a lot of our lovely trees. It disrupts our soil. It leaves kind of a scar, right? So we can put in bigger houses. And when we do put in those bigger houses, what we tend to do is put down, the developers will put back down just rolls of turf grass carpet, and you've probably seen them on trucks. It just rolls and rolls, and they just roll it back out onto the newly compacted soil that they've tried to put back in place. Not only do they put back turf grass, but they also put back in plants that would be insect resistant. These ornamental plants that, you know, nothing chews on them, so they always try to look good, et cetera, et cetera. What I have noticed, though, often is that when new people move into a brand new house and they have all these plants, they tend to forget to water them, and so they look kind of bad after not that long. But we have 40 million acres of turf grass in this country, and that is a lot. That is more than a number of our national parks put together. So the idea, the movement is amongst the gardening community and the national naturalist community and so forth, is that if we can turn some of that back into productive ecological use, we would be making some difference. And so if everybody could take a piece of their lawn and change it into a bed or add in some more trees, it will make a difference. So what is the impact of all this? The impact of all this is on the food web. If we don't have productive plants that insects will eat, then we don't have enough insects to feed our songbirds. If we don't have enough, and our regular other birds, and if we don't have enough birds, you know, there's not enough food for the higher other critters like fox and so forth. So it has a cascading effect upon our food web. And it eventually will affects us as well, because if we don't have our pollinators, then our own food is not pollinated, and we cannot produce our own produce. So I think the most effective piece of research that Sandy had pointed out was a study that was done by Desiree Narango about how much native plants do you need really to support the raising of chickadees, young chickadees. And she found that yards that have 70% native plant biomass, meaning has a lot of large trees and shrubs, woody plants that are native, will be the most effective in providing the habitat for the butterflies, for the moths, for the things that will provide the caterpillars that the birds would eat. And so then the birds would be able to fledge a group of young chickadees, and that would be a good thing. So she found, of course, that not all these yards had this, but the ones that did, it was really noticeable. So that's what's going on here. Is we have created a multi-pronged problem. Really, it's a matrix of issues that we can try to address through how we deal with our own yards. So Sandy also talked about 4 different habits that she thought were really indicative of how we think about our yards. And these habits, I have to say, we want people to understand that these are like acculturated habits. These are things that we have learned from very young. This is what we've seen. This is how we think things are supposed to be, right? Because everybody's doing it, or that's the way the horticultural industry has structured it. So the first one is that we are buying only for beauty. We go to these horticultural garden centers, and we're just looking for things that will make our yard pretty. And there's really no problem with that on the one hand. But on the other hand, what we're usually looking at in these places are plants that are not native plants, again, plants that will have very little food value for our local wildlife. So what we want to transfer to, what people to think about, is moving from that old habit to a new habitat practice, which is landscaping for beauty and for function, to conserve our soil, water, and our energy. These are the 3 sort of pillars of thinking about your landscape, right? We want to make sure that we have healthy soil. We want to make sure that we're conserving water, that we're dealing with the water, because stormwater is becoming more and more an issue for us. So we want to make sure that we're dealing with that as best we can in each yard. And there are ways of arranging and structuring your yard that help you actually reduce the energy uses of your own home. So let's start with soil conservation, because that's you start with soil. If you have healthy soil, you have healthy plants. So soil is basically made up of multiple kinds of things. It's made up of 45% of mineral particles. It's got water is about 25%. Air is 25%. Most people don't think of air being important in soil, but it is. You have organic matter, about 5%. Humus is about 80%. And that's like all of these little dead, organisms. You've got live organisms that are about 10%. And you've got root mass from all of your plants. These things, all of these things working together, it takes about 500 years for these interactions to create 1 inch of really pretty topsoil. So every time we just keep, cutting the soil off the top of our lots to build new homes, we keep interrupting that process, right? So what we're interested in doing in thinking about how we landscape now is think about how we structure our soil, because our soil is basic to everything we're going to be doing. Right now, most of us probably have compacted soil. If we don't have it throughout the whole yard, we have it somewhere in the yard, because we use the yard to play, we have pets, whatever, we have all kinds of projects going on. And definitely if you've just had your soil, had a whole new home put into your onto your lot, your soil is definitely going to be compacted and just have this sort of very thin layer of turf grass, spread out on top. So what we want to do is get to the far left picture. We want our soil to look a little more like this. We want our soil to form aggregates, not these sort of platelets, these sort of flattened platelets, because we want to be able to get air and water through the soil, right? And I want to just say that this is the soil structure has has something, is not as much to do with the kind of soil you have. You know, clay is very small, sand is very large, that sort of thing. It's really about how the soil, whatever you have has been compressed, okay? So clay is actually a very useful soil medium. Clay is filled with nutrients, really good stuff. And there are many, many, many native plants that just thrive in our clay. So when I hear people complain about the clay, I'm like, well, you know, there are ways to, there are things that will go in that clay that will work really well. So techniques to improve your soil. The most basic one that we're told over, it's like a mantra from our extension agent over and over again. It's like add organic matter. Just keep adding organic matter on top of your beds. You can use compost, you can use mulch, you can take wood chips and some mulch, some composted manure, mix them together, put it on top. And it's the idea of putting things on top and letting them rot down. You don't need to dig up a lot of stuff. You don't need to do any of that. You just need to keep putting things on top to let the nutrients seep into the soil and help the soil biome, all the critters in the soil, you know, find food. You can reduce compaction with just a little more strategic thinking about how you're using your yard, particularly if you can create designated paths by using stepping stones or even gravel or something to keep people going in one direction so you're not kind of walking all over the root systems. That kind of thing can be very useful too. Again, another really basic one that, again, it's another acculturated problem here, is we need to leave more of our leaves on our lots and around our trees. If you think about it, a tree drops its leaves and those leaves decompose and provide the nutrients for that tree through the winter. And that is extremely important. So it's its own closed system, so to speak. And yet we tend to rake them all off, usually put them out in front and at the curb, and they get picked up by the city, which is cool. But they then are, it then becomes, you know, sort of an energy sink, because now they're not on our lot anymore, and then we have to go get them to bring them back when they have been composted at the city compost, after the city compost lot. So it's better in many ways to leave as many of these leaves, or a good portion of the leaves on your lot. The down leaves are extremely important as habitat for overwintering of like fireflies, moths, things that will leave their eggs in those leaves. And you want the whole leaves, not them chopped up. So if you can put some of the whole leaves into some beds, leave some whole leaves scattered around in places that are okay to do that for you, that would be fantastic. This is, I think, something that is going to take a long time. It feels like it should be the easiest thing for us to just quickly figure this out and stop doing this and leaving more leaves. But it's so ingrained in us to rake up our leaves that it's taking a lot longer than I had anticipated for people to kind of catch on that this is really an important aspect of our overly cleaning of our properties. And so, but this one is one, if you don't do anything else, I would say just try to work on this one. This one would be really, really important, and you will see benefits from it. Planted green mulch. This is something Sandy had mentioned when she was showing us all these gorgeous plants. The reason you plant a green mulch is then you don't have to put down other kinds of mulch. You don't have to put down hardwood or shredded mulch at all. Your plants do the work for you. When your plants have finished over the winter, and when you're starting to kind of think about cleaning up a little bit, maybe in April, you can just cut the dry plant pieces and put them back right down onto the soil, right there. You don't need to bag them up and take them anywhere. You don't need to, you know, put them in. You could put them in your compost if you have compost, but you can also just keep regenerating and recycling right there on your bed. The reason we talk about using native plants is because the root systems are so much more robust than many of the ornamental plants from other countries that we have in our gardens right now. And we've had these ornamental non-native plants for a long time. I mean, we're talking the plant trade that has brought us these things and created this sense of this is what is beautiful for us has taken place over not just decades, but actually centuries. It's been about 200 years or so because the plant trade came with the settlers. So it's a long, a long process to try to unpack, but we have a lot more access now to a lot more different kinds of plants. We have a lot of access now, almost frighteningly so, to information, which allows us to think through some of these issues and figure out what would be best for our own yards. But as you can see, the root systems of some of the native plants, and these plants primarily are plants that grow in the prairies, but there's a few species in here that are definitely part of our palette as well, like the wild blue indigo. But you can see that the plant root systems go down feet, not just like our little turf grass here, lawn turf grass over here, which is about a couple inches. This is feet, long, long feet. And this is one of the issues that it's actually, you know, when you think of some of the extreme environmental disasters we've had, like Hurricane Harvey around Houston area, they got rid of so much switchgrass in their development process and the expansion of that city that they don't have these long root systems pulling water back down into the water table. It's gone. So this is really important to help us pull more water in, and as well, of course, as Sandy mentioned over and over, this is great for the plants, for the insects, because these are the kinds of plants we need to feed them and for them to host and raise their young. So what's happening at the plant root is important to understand too. The plant roots themselves, 80% of all plants have something called a mycorrhiza, which is a kind of fungi on their root systems. And this fungi is really important in helping to speed the nutrients into the plants and between the plants. It uses the carbon from the plants to grow. And so if any of you have ever like turned over some mulch, you know, you've had some hardwood mulch down and you start to turn it over, you're going to plant something in there and you see all this white stuff, that's the mycelium, or that's these little thread-like hyphae are the mycelium of this mycorrhiza that are helping to pull things through the soil. So this is what we want to try to encourage. It's literally rot. We want this kind of rot to happen in order to increase the biomass within the soil to be able to move the nutrients through and to actually open up our soil and make it more pliable for water and nutrients as well. So in terms of water conservation, I mean, the number one thing that people will tell you to do is to plant a tree, and that's always a good idea. If you have room for a tree, particularly a native tree, there are an array of beautiful trees that could go in your yard, depending on your light conditions and what's going on with your particular site. So a tree is always a good idea, and what's the old adage? The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. So doing it now is a great idea. Second, and the reason that it's so great to plant trees is because if any of you have had the opportunity to use iTree for anything, iTree can tell you, if you can give iTree the diameter, you know, how big your tree is in terms of its size of its trunk. It can tell you how much water, how much storm water that tree can absorb. And as you can see, for just this particular example here, I have a black cherry, a Prunus serratina. And so the ecological services of this particular tree are pretty tremendous. If it's only a small little tree at 2-inch diameter, it pulls in maybe 86 gallons of storm water a year. But by the time it's 10 inches, it's pulling down 1,358 gallons per year. Really large old trees can pull down 10, 12,000 gallons in a year. If you're planting an evergreen tree, the evergreens are always going to pull down per year more water because they're always on, so to speak. An evergreen is always pulling water. When with a deciduous tree, you're getting most of that pull with you've got the leaves going in the growth months, you know, in the spring through fall. But also the other thing that iTree can tell you is how much carbon dioxide are absorbed by the trees, how many pollutants and so forth. And this is the kind of metric that, you know, more urban forest policies are trying to use to help people understand what is gained and what's lost when you're moving, you know, taking trees out and putting new trees in. the ecological services of a black cherry too, in terms of how much wildlife it can support, are pretty tremendous. It can support 456 species of butterflies and moth, and many species of birds, at least 33 species of birds. So each tree has some different metrics, but the idea is generally the same, that this is what happens. This is true too of your shrubs. They also can provide a lot of stormwater, not as much as trees, but still they provide a lot of stormwater management. And they have a lot of ecological services in terms of, they provide a lot of fruit for birds and other creatures. So plant a shrub or change out some of your shrubs. One of the issues that we have is that to me, the shrub layer is always seems to be the most problematic thing going on in most of our yards, because we have shrubs that just, they're just almost plastic in lots of ways. And so if you have a lot of old shrubs, if you can, change out one or two over time, depending on what your abilities and your financial, what kind of cost you can bear, I think that's a really great way to go, because that structure, again, things that are shorter, like the shrubs and our small understory trees, most of our birds in particular, they will nest and forage with 15 feet within the 15 feet from the ground. And so those are the things that they're often looking for, places to hide, places to put nests. And our shrubs, again, we have a huge variety of shrubs to choose from. Some other techniques for water conservation that some of you probably are already familiar with. There's things like putting rain barrels. Rain barrels help to slow, the water coming off of your roof. And it also provides you with a nice water source to be able to use during really hot, dry months, so you're not using potable water. One of the issues with our water is that, particularly when you're using potable water, is that, we have a very small supply of fresh potable water for us to drink in the entire globe. It's less than 1% of all the water that we have on this earth. And so it's really important for us to try to recycle the water from rainwater and so forth, maybe gray water even, so that we can try to keep as much potable water available for our own use. Another thing you can do is with water conservation is the permeable paver idea in your driveway or along any walkway that you might decide to build. That really helps allow water to get through and into the groundwater table. Bioswales or rain gardens have become very fashionable, and the bioswale in particular, I think, is a really nice technique because it's not that difficult to do. And basically, it's actually the old ditch idea. I mean, I am from Texas. I'm from Southeast Texas originally, and it's Hurricane Alley there, and there's a lot of ditches. I mean, just ditches, because you just get all this water dumping in, and then it's got to move somewhere, right? It's just ditches covered with grass. This is a little more, I'd say, sophisticated idea. The bioswale is, again, it's a depression. You could line it with rock. It allows water to be managed and maybe to move and flow in a particular direction that you might want it to go. You can put plants into it and so forth. But the idea is that the water would come in and fill this up, and it should be out of there and flowed into the ground within about 2 days. So, but this is a really nice technique. You've probably started to see more of these. Not the rain gardens are a little bit more, I think, complex and deeper. But the bioswale is a really nice one that anybody could create for their own garden. It's a good one. Another thing that you can do to help with water conservation is deal with your slopes. And this is a tough one because slopes are hard. But terracing is probably one of the best things to do if you have a slope problem and erosion problems. On the left-hand side, this before and after as a master gardener colleague, and she and her husband did a really extensive, beautiful job of putting this staircase in, even with a French drain pipe underneath it, so that the water would go down and then it comes out at the bottom at a rain garden. I mean, they went all out. And this is really it makes this space more usable, and it stabilizes it. And the water is coming from the street. So she was even thinking of doing more things at the street because that's where it's running off. And she has a big hill. And a lot of us do have lots of hills in our yards. Another thing you can do is use something like core logs, or you can use pieces of down timber, big branches, anything that you could lay across and start getting building up some kind of a stopgap to allow you to start putting some plants in. This is just another way you can think about trying to terrace your slope. Energy conservation. So I mentioned before that if you plant your plants or particularly your big woody plants in particular ways around your yard, you can actually help conserve energy inside your home. And right now in in the US, single family homes consume about 22% of all of our energy, which is quite a lot. And the EPA, according to the EPA, if you have really thoughtful landscaping design, you might be able to reduce that use within each house by as much as 40%. So what does that mean? So basically, this is the old idea of, knowing how your house is situated, which way is north, south, east, and west. I mean, sometimes I realize I didn't probably think about that for most places I used to live. So knowing that is really important because in the wintertime, a lot of wind, cold wind comes from the northwest. And in the summertime, you get a lot of warm breezes from the sort of say the southwest. So when you are thinking about putting shrubbery or any kind of evergreen or trees around your house, if you want to try to block your northwest winds, you can do it. You can do so with sort of like a hedgerow. You can put your deciduous trees in places in the front where you're going to be able to have them nice and full in the summertime and blocking the hot heat. But then in the wintertime, they will defoliate and then you'll be able to get the warm sun into your windows then. So this kind of thinking. So this is this throw some shade idea. You're going to throw shade around your house in ways that actually help you minimize, how much you're using your air conditioner, say. You can actually shade your AC units. You can shade over any surfaces, try to put shade in places that help block some of the sun during particularly the hottest months over your driveways, your patios, or anything like that. Even your foundation plants can offer some extra insulation, particularly if you have evergreen foundation plants that are about 3 feet or so from the house. You're going to be able to create kind of a pocket of air between you and those plants, which will allow you to keep it warmer in the winter and even cooler in the summer because you've got this pocket of air. So spacing trees, and this picture on the right is a do as I say and not as I do moment for me because this tree just started growing in and I was like, oh, I'll get to it, and then I just never did. And it's fun. There's all kinds of stuff running up and down this tree. It's a black cherry tree, but it's in the wrong place and it's going to have to be removed at some point. It's way too close to the house. So when you're spacing your trees or spacing your trees and your shrubs, really, you need to really think through how far you're putting them. This particular list of metrics I have here is something that I'll make sure that you all get in the email after this so that you can see, because this is too much for you to think through or write down right now. But there is kind of a minimum amounts of space that you ought to be leaving between things. And particularly for trees, it should be at least something like 8 feet from a building, 8 to 10 feet for a small tree, a large tree more like 20 feet. You need to make sure you're not planting, too close to certain wires. So you need to anything that's over 30 feet should be at least 25 feet from overhead wires. You want to be 3 feet from the pavement. 15 feet between trees, even your shrubs, you should plant them, a few feet from the wall, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of engineering going on here. And the problem is, I know that I've done this, and even your fence line, you should make sure that you pull it in from your fence line enough so that when it's at whatever it is, it's a shrub or a tree is at its full capacity, it's fully grown. You won't have a lot of it hanging over in your neighbor's yard because in Virginia, don't remember if you might recall, your neighbor has a by right ability to cut whatever is hanging over in their yard. So, you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you have control over your tree or your shrub. So pull them in enough so that you can get around them and keep them shaped. So The other thing to remember too, I know I've done this as well, is that, you know, when you're planting a little tree or a little shrub, it looks so little, right? And so you're out there trying to put it in a space, and you're just not measuring it in terms of what it's going to be like when it's fully grown. So always measure twice at whatever the tree or shrub should be at 5 years old, and then put the little tiny shrub in the place where it should go. That's one that's I often forget myself, but it's an important one. Okay, Billette, are there any questions at this point?
So we have one question and one comment. The first question is, and I believe it's referring to the leaves, but is it okay to rake up leaves in the spring?
Yeah, I think once we've gotten to about April, once we're about in, I think Sandy may be able to but there is some controversy about exactly when you should start cleaning up in the spring. I have noticed that if I leave certain things up for longer than April, then there's still birds on the dead seed heads and there's still things happening. So, but I think April is probably about right when you could start to rake things up if you needed to. If they should also just be able just to decompose. I mean, if you can leave things in the bed and just add a little, top dress it with a little mulch or compost or whatever, and allow those things just to continue to break down in the bed, that's even a better thing to do. I know that people who have things like magnolia leaves or some big, you know, hardy certain oak leaves, they take a really long time to break down. And so I know some people might want to try to move some of those out or put them into a compost bin to get them speeded up.
All right, and we actually got another question in too, but the comment was, someone said that they're going to start leaving leaves around their tree trunks this fall. It's a great tip. Thank you.
All right. Yay, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and then the most recent question, what is and I think it's pronounced a core, C-O-I-R?
Oh, a core, I'm sorry, yeah, a core log is basically, it's coconut husks. So it's a coconut husked thing. Coconut husks all put together with I think they just use twine. It's not wire or anything. I think it's just like twine or something to hold it together. And basically it's the kind of thing that has been used extensively in shoreline conservation throughout the country, rivers, lakes, and so forth, because you can put it up against the shoreline, and then you can take things like willow switches and just drive them through the core log into the ground. And willow is really, really fast growing. So things like that can grow in, you know, and keep that in place. And then that starts to allow, you know, the soil on one side to build up and give you that terracing, or give you the shoreline, you know, effect that you need to have to stop the erosion. Great. And they're available. I mean, that stuff's available now at many box stores. It's available. I've seen it in many box stores now. It might not be in the store itself, but you can order it. Okay.
Well, this is Sandy.
Yeah.
Another thing that I would say about raking the leaves in the spring, because you're also going to have the beginnings of grass growing rather aggressively, I always rake my leaves up and bag them, because then that's the perfect thing for me to combine with my grass clippings in my compost pile.
Right. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, another great use.
There's so many uses.
Yeah. And actually, we have a great group for questions tonight. We have another one that just came in. Do you have a favorite ground cover to replace grass that can take foot traffic?
That was one you got asked to, Sandy. That's a tough one, because what we often say is, if you want the look of ground cover, you want to look kind of grassy, then sedges are wonderful. There's a number of kinds of sedges, but you can't really step on them that well. You can put, you know, nice paving stones through them. Normally, I'm going to get to our lawns here and talk about this a little bit too. Maybe I should just move on, and maybe this will help answer this question.
Yeah. Why don't you move on? And if you want us to clarify the question again, you guys can just type it back in, or if you have specific, I don't know.
Okay. All right. So the second habit that Sandy had brought up is that we love our lawns. We have this love affair with our lawns. And again, this is a long history to this, right? This was a way of the burgeoning middle class to feel as though that they had made it, right? That they had lawn. And there are many good uses of lawn, really. I mean, you can play on it. Your dogs can run on it. It has some usefulness to us in terms of our exercise and so forth. But it has become a real sink in terms of how much time we spend on it. And again, that it is basically a monoculture. This 40 million acres of lawn has actually exceeded now corn as the top agricultural product in the United States. It's the #1 crop, turf grass, which is crazy. So it's not that we think lawn is not useful, but we just think there's too much of it. And there are other ways to deal with it. And also it just uses a lot of inputs. You need to lime it or fertilize it or whatever. And this just has gotten to a point where we need to rethink some of this. So our new habitat practice is breaking up with our lawns. It's breaking up our lawns into ways that we can create more bedding for many of these new plants that we've been talking about. And that just add, again, this is a way that you can absorb more water because your lawn doesn't absorb as much water as you think it might, which just adds more beauty to your yard. The way to go about this, there are some people who've gone whole hog, right? I mean, they have taken out their yards. They've just taken them all out. They just did the whole thing. And it's gorgeous. I mean, the very first photo that I showed you of the house with the beautiful scarlet flowers, they pretty much did that. They took out the lawn. But some of us, it may not be practical because the lawn is just still too big, or you need to think through how much time you have to be able to tend to what you're, to do the project, and how much time you're going to have to tend to the new plants while they get established. So I think the best thing to think about is to work on first, if you have trees, think about, widening the mulch areas around your trees. When a new tree goes in, you probably have seen a new tree, like a 2-inch tree go in, and there's like a little mulch ring around it, right? And then as that tree grows, oftentimes that little mulch ring always stays about the same size. Well, that little mulch ring ought to be expanding out to the drip line, and the drip line is the widest branching out from the trunk. So you should always have your mulch circle expanding with your tree. So I think if a lot of people would do that, then you would get this lovely bed right around your trees that you could put in. You can put in many of the lovely plants that we've been talking about. But even if you're just putting mulch down, you're actually providing more nutrition for the tree, and you're removing the lawn from competing with the tree. The problem with lawn and trees is that they have two different desires for the pH of the soil. Trees like the soil to be more acidic, and lawn likes it more basic. Okay, so that's a kind of a disconnect there. The other thing you can do in terms of widening your existing beds is just simply start to connect some of your beds together. Again, you're still got some of your lawn, and you may use your lawn as a path now, or just have focal points of lawn where you use it for entertaining or for the dog or whatever, but you are just trying to take some of this out a little at a time. And this is kind of what I usually tend to do. And of course, I do it stealthily so that my husband doesn't notice it. I just kind of take out another 6-8 inches or whatever this spring, and just kind of keep making it. One day he said, "There's not going to be a front lawn left, is there?" And I didn't say anything. I just was quiet. But I think it's a little bit more manageable than trying to do it all at once for many reasons. So this picture actually comes from here in the city, and on Broad Street. This house actually has just come down, and there's going to be, I think, 3 houses built on this lot, or 4 houses built on this lot now. But some years ago, the naturalist for the city of Alexandria took this photo on the left, which shows this old age remnant forest grove of black oak, white oak, chestnut oak, here in the city of Falls Church. Well, last, October, I went by and I looked at it, and this is what it looked like. I think that a number of those oaks succumbed to the oak, the oak die-off that has been happening throughout the region. And one of the reasons that oaks have been succumbing, these are trees that really should be living long lives, is that the landscapes around them have been they're just not in a landscape that is conducive to their health. That coupled with too much water and then too much drought back and forth just took a lot of them out, which is really quite sad. But so as you can see, in the left-hand side, you can see where the riding mower is just going back and forth over all of this tree root, and just, for decades this happened, right? So even that there's at least one of these trees left, I think is pretty amazing. But this is, I think, a really good example of why this kind of practice, it's not conducive to for us to try to hold on to a lot of these beautiful old trees. So other little things that you can do for your lawn, you can just, if you're just not sure yet what you're not ready to take this step, you can simply mow your turf higher, keep it higher. There has been studies that show that if you keep it clipped like 3.5 to 4 inches, then the root system is kind of mirrors that. So you get a deeper root system than the usual, just a couple inches down. That's a little more helpful. The other thing is you can go retro, and probably many of you who are, I'm gonna date myself, any of us who are probably over 50 know that way back in the day, most lawns had clover in them. White clover was part of the seed mix. And I don't know exactly when they stopped doing this, probably in the 80s or something, like early 80s, but you could go back to using white clover. And white clover is a good turf management kind of approach. If you need something that's really steppable, something that you can play on, the white clover mixed in with your seedgrass would be great. You're then providing, even though it's a non-native flower, it comes from Europe, but it does provide nectar to bees, and bees do kind of love the clover. And it's really quite easy to manage. There's the white clover, and I think they've now got something called a micro clover, which is just a little more smaller, tighter version of that. So I don't know if that completely answers your question, but just rethinking your lawn in terms of what the composition of it is. I know my lawn is what is called a freedom lawn. I don't know if that's pejoratively called a freedom lawn, but I just don't really do anything to my lawn. It's full of violets. It's full of some other, non-native herbaceous weed plants. It's got some turf grass in there. It's green. It's always green. And so I just cut it and let it go. And the stuff that's in the back, the turf that I have in the back, I hand pull the weeds back there because it's not that much. And again, it's very green. And I just decided that as long as it looks green, it's fine. I'm not going to worry about whatever is growing in there as much as I should. You've probably seen some of your neighbors who have amazing ephemerals like spring beauties growing in their lawns in the early spring, like in late March into April. Again, these are folks who decided to eschew a lot of the usual lawn care practices and let things just take shape. And it's amazing some of the stuff that comes up in people's lawns when you just kind of let it go a little bit. If you really want to make sure that you still have pieces of lawn that are well green and look lush, and the way that we have become used to, just make sure that you're following the appropriate guidelines for how you should fertilize, how you should cut it, and all that kind of stuff. So the thing we really want to minimize is the sort of overuse of fertilizer, because fertilizer is what washes off, gets into our stormwater system and into the bay, and it causes quite a lot of havoc. So you can still have a little lawn, just be sure that you're following all of the right things that you should do with managing it. So old habit number 3 is relying on pesticides, fertilizers, and herbicides way too much, right? And our new habitat practice is to rely on integrated pest management, something called IPM, and mussel. These two photos that are on the left here are of a taconid flies and the one, and this is a brachynoid or potter's wasp. Both of these are parasitic type insects, which feed on other non-native or problematic insects. So I had put in a lot of, sort of native plants, and I started getting these kinds of interesting insects into my yard to help me, deal with certain kinds of pests. On the right is, good old muscle power. A lot of handwork is often the way to deal with some things in your yard too. And so we shouldn't forget that some of this is work. There is still a lot of work, but you learn an incredible amount by going out there and using your hands to deal with things. One of the things that I think is important when we're thinking through about using herbicides, pesticides, that sort of thing, is often we are, again, acculturated to believe that certain things are problematic, right? There is something called pejoratively broadleaf, right? And broadleaf is technically, a lot of broadleaf are common violets, and common violets, this picture right here, are one of our native wildflowers. They're incredibly important to the fritillary butterflies, as Sandy mentioned to us. But there are other things that pop up in our yards, like the spring beauties, the Virginia creeper, the white wood aster, the little blue-eyed grass. These things can come into your yard on their own because the birds bring seed, or maybe they were in the soil. There's some seed in the soil, and as you started to make things a little more dynamic, it came back up. It wasn't suppressed by weeds anymore. It came back up. So I think what's important is that we make sure we understand what it is we're trying to get rid of and why. So these things, if you come in, I think you should be excited. I know I am, because it's like, this is great. And technically, some of these things, literally, they're like $6 a pot at some of the plant sales, right? And if they're coming in your yard for free, then that's great. It's just being able to kind of identify them. So one of the things about this integrated pest management is about how you have to do a little of your own research to make sure you understand what it is you're trying to deal with. The common herbaceous weeds are everywhere, right? And these are the herbs that came with the settlers. Again, some of these things have been here for 200 years. Some of them they're problematic in the sense that they're annoying. Sometimes they do provide a little bit of nectar, if there's really nothing else going on in a landscape. A lot of these can be pulled by hand. And the thing to know is when you find and identify them, just find out what their sort of life cycle is. When is the best time to get them? Because some of them, the reason they keep spreading is because we get them too late and they go to seed and then they get everywhere. So if you can get them before they go to seed, you can probably take care of them by hand, depending on the size of your yard, pretty well. The other thing you can do too, though, if you're having a real trouble with certain things that just won't die, or you can't get them out, they're just too tough. If you do need to use some kind of herbicide, make sure you use a piece of PVC pipe and place that pipe over the plant and just squirt one squirt into that plant. Never use more than what is suggested on the back of a package for any kind of herbicide or pesticide. Never. If you do that, you get it onto other plants and you will cause a little die-off in your own yard. So if you do feel like you have to try to use some, do it very carefully. Wear gloves. We all have masks now. You can wear a mask even to help keep some of it out. But just be really careful with it because it is dangerous. It's dangerous stuff. You're killing things with that. So we try to discourage people from using it, but we understand that it's out there. Our marketplace is flooded with it. It's suggested all the time. So we just want people to be conscious of what they're doing and be careful and read the instructions. The other thing that's in your yard that is a real problem are invasive plants. And this is becoming more and more of a problem. This is beyond the little herbaceous herbs, the little herbaceous weeds that we annoy us. So 40% of all plants in urban areas are now considered invasive species. And removing some of these is really tough. I mean, it requires a lot of muscle, but it also can require, I think, just thinking through, again, the life cycle of these plants and when is the best time to go after them. One of the best booklets I think that's out there right now is Fairfax County has this little non-native invasive ID and control book, this little citizen's guide that's online. They've got a lot of good information in there about helping you to identify and make sure you know what you're looking at, and then what are the best ways to try to take it out. The other place that you can go to get some instruction on dealing with some of these invasive plants is the Habitat Restoration Team actually has online with the city a whole bunch of little technical tip sheets for about every month. We have one for every month, so there's 12 of them. And we calendarized these tip sheets so that you would know what you should be looking for in that month and and that was the time to take it out. So there's those kinds of things. The biggest one still, I mean, some of these are really problematic. There's a lot of porcelain berry and so forth, but the biggest one that's still really difficult to deal with is the English ivy, because it's the one that really can cause incredible destruction of your trees in terms of just growing up them and collapsing them. And the birds like the berries. So if it gets up your trees, that's when it will flower and berry, and that's when the birds will take the berries and deposit them into your yard and your neighbor's yard. So my PSA here about removing English ivy from trees. And the other thing too is if you walk around your neighborhood, like in the wintertime, and English ivy is pretty much an evergreen. So you can actually see how many trees in your neighborhood are covered in English ivy. It's kind of shocking. So the way to deal with English ivy is to cut what's called a lifesaver ring around the base of the trunk, about 2 or 3 feet from the trunk, and then remove the vine about 2 or 3 feet up. There's no need to pull it up, keep going. Don't try to pull it out of the tree. Don't try to rip it at all. Just cut it up and away from the base of the trunk. In some instances, you probably want to make sure you have on some long sleeves and gloves because there might be poison ivy if you've got a very, very shady yard. But getting this stuff out is really important. And I've noticed that many trees are really covered with this. And this campaign to get this stuff out has been going on for probably a couple decades now. And so you can see why it's just such a persistent plant. All right, the other things that you want to control in your yard and have a tendency to want to spray them are your mosquitoes. And it really, it's better to think about your mosquitoes again in terms of their life cycle. When are they doing? What are they doing? How are they doing it? And just try to remember to drain all the standing water in your yard. Now, this is something that requires a little bit of CSI work because they can lay eggs in a teaspoon of water anywhere. All right. They can lay eggs under damp English ivy, another good reason to get rid of the English ivy. So the thing about going around your yard is a good way for you to actually check too on kind of what's going on in terms of the water disposition in your yard. But you can see all these things, like children's toys that have been left out can get a little water, mosquitoes can grow in there. The use of biological larvicides like the Mosquito Dunks, which I'm showing here, this is like one of the very few products that we actually, master gardeners, endorse because it's a really nice way to toss this into a water, particularly like a bird bath or a rain barrel, even though a rain barrel usually will have a netting over the top. It shouldn't be getting anything in there, but just in case, if you feel like something's going on, you can always throw one into your rain barrel. That's a good way to kill them at the larva stage when they're eggs and their larvae. Again, removing English ivy can also help. Using landscape treatments for mosquitoes and ticks. Is this a good idea? Well, if you're trying to get rid of ticks, no. The sprays are not effective and are non-selective, meaning they will kill everything else too. It's better to deal with what's called habitat management, right? Where you will get rid of some of the brush. Maybe you've got really tall grass. You try to open things up so that they won't have a place to live. Keep things cleaned up, around edges of you have like a foresty sort of backyard, keeps things a little bit cleaner. With mosquitoes, you probably all know that many people are using those services where they come to spray. And they tend to tell you that they're using something natural. Technically, it is natural. They're using permethrin, which comes from chrysanthemum flowers. And chrysanthemum flowers, though, the oils from these flowers provide a toxin, a neurotoxin, which kills insects. So again, this stuff is non-selective. So if they're spraying your yard, they will tend to probably kill other things too. There's been work that's shown that if you're going to use these kinds of applications, that you shouldn't put them on your food crops, you shouldn't put them on your flowering plants when the pollinators are visiting, you shouldn't be applying them when pollinators are active. And when pollinators are active from 8 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which is basic business hours for these kinds of services. You can't apply them on a windy day because then they blow over into other things, or on a really hot part of the day, or even in a rain event because then they just wash out. So, this is again, a new kind of cultural habit that people are doing, and we are really trying to convince them and to try to help them understand that what they're doing has a broader impact. I have already heard, people who do a lot of native gardening, and then their neighbor starts using a mosquito service, and they see, it's very distressing for them because they can see that it's causing a decline in the things that they've been trying to attract. So there's that. All right, the last old habit, wasting money and water. And the new habit that we need to think about is how we rethink, reduce, and recycle. The old adage was reduce, reuse, and recycle. I think it should be rethink, reduce, and recycle. And there are three ways. I think there's many ways, but these three I think are really, I think, the most easy to start with, and they actually don't really cost anything. Mulching. Okay, the volcano mulch. How many of you have seen this volcano mulch? I mean, every spring it's like it just happens. And after so many years of understanding that this is the improper way to mulch, and recognizing that many landscaping companies are using this way, it just makes no sense. The problem with volcano mulch is that you are actually putting moisture around the very bottom of your tree. So what'll happen is that the tree thinks that that's the new, top ground level. And so it'll start shooting out new rootlets. And then you can also, because all that moisture is there, it can encourage beetles, it can encourage other kind of wood boring things to come in there, and you can start to rot your tree right at the base, and it can just eventually just topple over. So the better correct mulching technique is to pull things away from the trunk of your tree, and you should try to create something more like a donut, at 2 or 3 inches thick, but at least maybe 3-6 inches. It depends on the size of the tree, but get it away from the very trunk of the tree. And you don't need to have, a foot up high. Just 2 or 3 inches deep is the best. The other thing with volcano mulching, because it's so thick, you actually aren't. It's holding kind of moisture, but it's actually preventing a lot of rain from getting into the tree, down into the roots, because it's just kind of rolling off, right? So you don't want to cover the root flare of the tree, which is where the trunk starts to change out into the roots. You want to keep that open. Again, another idea here, instead of using mulch, is just to start planting around this tree, to create a bed around this tree that you start to plant. The other thing to remember is when you're planting around a tree, if it's a young tree and you're putting sun plants around the tree, in about 2 or 3 years, those plants will not thrive very well because you need to be having, shade plants underneath that tree. So think through what kinds of plants you choose. You can actually choose plants that can do okay with a little more range like that, but think that through. Otherwise, it's just really kind of distressing. I've done that one too. You can reduce your uses of water by watering more efficiently. You can water infrequently but deeply. And most plants need about 1 inch of water a week, particularly when you've got new trees and so forth. You need to give them quite a lot of water. You need to make sure that they're getting watered well. Some people misunderstand that if it's raining, then everything's going to be fine. But you really need to go out there and check to see how it's doing around your plants or your water or your new trees. if they seem dry, you need to water them. New shrubs also, you need extra water for the first 2 years. It's better to water during the morning hours, during the morning before it gets really hot, and particularly in the summer. You want to target the roots rather than the leaves. You don't want to, if you use a sprinkler, sprinklers are really quite inefficient. It's like 40% or something of the water just evaporates in a sprinkler. It's better to just open up a hose and have it running slowly and put it up next to a tree and let the water trickle in for, half an hour, 15 minutes, whatever. That's a better way to water. Don't just water the neighborhood. Try to water around the roots of your plants. All right, and then the last thing is recycle. And composting, it closes the loop on all of this. So if you don't have a compost system going yet, I encourage you to think it through, because if you can create your own black gold, so to speak, then you'll have ways to put things to put onto your plants that you don't have to go out and buy, bags of mulch. You don't have to go schlep, the mulch from the public works site or whatever. So composting is, I think, a really important thing for us all to be doing as much as we can in our own yards. And the photo on the right there is Dumbarton Oaks. And as you can see, that this is my ideal composting system, which would be, the system next to it is pretty plain, but the tool shed is really what I'm hoping for someday, just like that. So the resources that I've used for this particular talk come from several places. Landscape for Life is the biggest one. They've been probably 10 years now, have a wonderful website with lots of information. The Chesapeake Landscape Conservation Council has this great book on guidelines, very, very succinct, gets right to the point of things that you can be doing. The Native Plants for Northern Virginia booklet is also got a lot of good specific issues like slopes, small space, really dry. They've got some very nice scenarios in the booklet and tells you what kinds of plants work for those spaces. The Master Gardeners of Northern Virginia website has a slew of information on it. They also have a number of video classes on some of these things that I've talked about, which you could get to very easily. And lastly, the City of Falls Church has resources I hope that you all know about. There's the Neighborhood Tree Program for street trees. These are the first two, the Neighborhood Tree Program and the Rain Smart Program for rain barrels, are done in conjunction with the Village Preservation and Improvement Society. So these are really wonderful programs that help you get free street trees and get you a nominal price for a rain barrel or two. The Habitat Restoration team that I mentioned has these tip sheets on invasive plants online on the city's website, which are, I think, very useful. Sandy is our composting queen, and she has taught workshops in the city for some time now. So there are composting workshops that you can take advantage of. And probably not last, but then certainly not least, the Falls Church Garden Club is a good place to get information. And they also are going to be having a plant sale on June 19th in the community center. We're actually have been okay to have that. So there will be there'll be all kinds of plants, but a number of people are bringing, I know, some native plants there. So that's one place you can get, information on plants or come and look at plants. And I think that's all I have. We have questions?
Yeah, we have an interesting question here. Why hasn't someone developed a grass that's only grows 3 inches high? Would fertilizers and mower companies not like that?
I'm sorry, why? I'm sorry that again. Why would somebody who's
they'd like to they want to know, why hasn't someone tried to develop some kind of grass that only grows 3 inches high, or which might solve some of their problems.
Right. Yeah, there are in some places, somebody had asked about what kind of grass. In the west of us, like in Southwest and some other, not quite Southwest, but Texas, mid country, there are some grass seed mixes that are like tough, short prairie type stuff that grow well in those climates. So you can find grass seed mixes of native grass to populate your yard with. Here in our deciduous forest biome, we just don't quite have the same kinds of options with our short plants, other than our sedges, which are really beautiful. But as I say, they don't take a lot of running on. They won't last that way. But yeah, I don't know. They've geo-engineered or bioengineered just about everything. So it wouldn't surprise me that somebody did invent that and it didn't last very long on the open market.
Yeah. And if anyone else has any questions, we'll wait a moment here, get them in. We do have a thank you for the webinar. They learned a few things that they're going to try in their yard. So that's great.
Awesome. Sandy, is there anything you want to contribute?
Well, no, I just wanted to thank everybody for listening in on us, and hopefully we've given you some ideas and some inspiration to try to take some of your, what we're calling old habits, and sort of rethink about the importance of what you're putting in your yard and how you're putting it in.
Right. And a number of the things that I've mentioned in here, like all these resources and some of the technical metrics, I'll put them in a sheet so that when Marshall sends the follow-up email to you all, about how to get to the video and all that, you'll have that information there too.
Fantastic. And here's another, thanks for the picture and story about the oaks on Broad Street. They had attributed the issue to the wilt with no thought of the issue of the grass growing up the trunks. So they enjoyed that.
Yeah, that's a hard one because that was such a multi-causal issue. So many things. I mean, those are trees that should live for several hundred years probably. But the urban environment in which we have subjected them, they just couldn't make it.
All right. And I think, unless anyone wants to get in, a last minute question here. We've just got some thank yous and excellent sessions and appreciation, which is wonderful.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you all. I really enjoyed this. I hope that that there was something from this that you could take. It is doing this landscaping, this is sustainable landscaping type talks. It does feel like you're just throwing the kitchen sink at everybody because there's just so much you can discuss. And I really was kind of covering the surface. Each and every one of those sections could go even deeper in terms of other techniques, more things to know. It's a rabbit hole, but I enjoy the rabbit hole, and I hope others of you too will find some of this useful and fun. So thank you.
Fantastic. Marshall, you want to take us out?
Yeah, so I'll just remind everyone, as Amy mentioned, that we'll be sending out a final follow-up email probably next week with a link to the recording for this session and also the previous two sessions and any additional resources that Amy and Sandy supply between now and then. And one last thank you to Amy and Sandy for just putting so much effort into this amazing 3-part series, which was very informative, and we hope to partner with them in the future. So with that, I'll stop the recording, and I hope everyone has a nice evening.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Billette. Thanks, Marshall. It's been great to work with you.
Bye-bye.